21 years. That's how long it took Madonna to make another album that fans and critics could actually agree on. And look, it's not like she wasn't trying. Over those 2 decades, she worked with basically every A-list producer you can name: Timbaland, Pharrell, Kanye, Diplo, Avicii, Justin Timberlake. People who literally defined what pop music sounded like in their respective eras. On paper, that's an insane lineup. That should have worked every single time. But instead, album after album, she kept drifting further away from the artist who'd spent her whole career staying one step ahead of everyone else. Sales kept slipping, critics kept splitting down the middle, and every new release led to the same headline: Has Madonna lost it? And then, out of nowhere, in 2026, she does something nobody saw coming. She gets back in the studio with Stuart Price, the guy behind Confessions on a Dance Floor, and announces the sequel everyone had been begging for, Confessions 2. Now, normally when an artist goes back to a 20-year-old album for inspiration, that's a red flag. That usually means I'm out of ideas, so let's coast on nostalgia. One last lap before the finish line. But that's not what happened here. Confessions 2 ended up being one of the most celebrated records of her entire career, which honestly begs the question: if the fix was this simple, just make another dance album with Stuart Price, why did it take her 20 years to actually do it? To get why Confessions 2 hit as hard as it did, we've got to rewind to the album that started it all. The one that basically haunted every Madonna release for the next 2 decades. Back in 2005, Madonna dropped Confessions on a Dance Floor, and honestly, the timing could not have been more perfect. American Life had flopped commercially, and people were genuinely wondering if Madonna still had a place in a pop world that was moving fast. Britney, Justin, Nelly Furtado, everyone was chasing that polished pop R&B sound, and hip-hop was running the charts. She could have easily jumped on that train, the same way she pivoted to R&B back in '94 with Bedtime Stories. But she didn't. Instead, she went all in on disco, electronic music, club culture, and built an album that felt like one continuous, cohesive experience from start to finish. That's not an easy thing to pull off. With Stuart Price mainly behind the boards, Confessions wasn't trying to copy whatever was trending at the time. If anything, it just ignored the trends completely. And that confidence? That's exactly what made it work. Hung Up dropped as the lead single and just exploded everywhere. The album turned into one of the defining pop records of the decade. Critics who'd been lukewarm on her suddenly welcomed her back with open arms. She more than doubled American Life's sales and walked away with 2 Grammys tied to that era. This wasn't just another good Madonna album. It became the yardstick every future Madonna record would get measured against. Nobody realized it at the time, least of all Madonna herself. But she'd just set a bar she'd spend the next 20 years trying to clear again. Fast forward 2 years, and the whole landscape had flipped. Dance music had been Madonna's playground with Confessions, but now urban-tinged electropop was running the show everywhere else. Justin had future sex/love sounds. Nelly Furtado had Loose. Britney had just dropped Blackout. Arguably the best-reviewed albums of all 3 of their careers. And behind the scenes, it was pretty much the same crew every time. Timbaland, the Neptunes, Danja. These were the guys shaping mainstream pop at that moment. So bringing them in for Madonna's next album, Hard Candy, felt like a no-brainer. Of course she'd want in on that. But here's the thing looking back. This was actually a turning point, and not in a good way. For most of her career, Madonna had this uncanny ability to find a sound before it blew up. She was always early. This time, she showed up late to her own party. The only other time that had really happened was with Bedtime Stories, her first dip into R&B. Now, I'm not saying Hard Candy is a bad album. It's really not. With that level of production talent involved, it was basically impossible to make something unlistenable. Miles Away and Devil Wouldn't Recognize You still hold up as fan favorites today. And 4 Minutes? That became her highest charting single since Music. Though let's be real, having Justin Timberlake at the absolute peak of his career on the track definitely didn't hurt. The album still debuted strong, hitting #1 in 37 countries, so commercially it wasn't a disaster by any stretch. But the general vibe was, this is a step down from Confessions. The excitement from that previous era had cooled off into something more cautious, and that's when the conversation around Madonna started to shift. People stopped asking, where's she taking pop music next? And started asking, is she even keeping up anymore? And that shift matters, because, for decades, Madonna's whole thing wasn't just adapting to trends, it was setting them. Hard Candy was one of the first times her reinvention felt like it was playing catch-up instead of leading the charge, not because the songs were weak, but because you could literally point to where every influence came from. That instinct to move first, instead of following, that's what always separated her from everyone else. And once that started slipping, you could see it in the numbers too. Hard Candy came in noticeably behind Confessions, and while it still edged out American life globally, that era of guaranteed blockbuster sales was officially over. Sure, the industry had changed a ton in those 5 years, but still, this was the beginning of a slide that would stretch on for years. Things only got messier from there. In 2009, a year after her divorce from Guy Ritchie, Madonna dropped Celebration, another greatest hits compilation. Usually those albums are a nice, tidy way to close one chapter and open another. Not this time. The two new songs on it were basically pulling in opposite directions. Celebration leaned club music, while Revolver, with Lil Wayne, went for that electronic urban pop sound. Neither one really said, here's exactly where I'm headed next. And that same uncertainty carried straight into MDNA in 2012. This album had one of the biggest promotional pushes an artist could ask for. She'd just headlined the Super Bowl halftime show weeks earlier, in front of one of the largest TV audiences on the planet. For most artists, that's a guaranteed launchpad. Instead, the conversation got hijacked almost immediately by M.I.A. flipping off the camera during the performance. Yeah, that happened live, on national TV. NBC had to publicly apologize for the whole thing after their delay system failed. It's kind of a running theme with Madonna at this point. Even when things go right, something else always manages to steal the spotlight from the actual music.